Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back for having the week off last week. And hopefully, some of you were able to take in the Commuter Transportation Summit, which was very successful. And if not, there'll be another one next year. Um, so look for it. And as if you just joined us, Christine also indicated that we'll be putting up copies of the presentations on commuterservices.com. So even if you attended or you didn't attend and want to look at some of the presentations, you'll be able to take a look at those too. So I'm Phil Winters. I'm the TDM program director here at CUTR. I'll be your instructor for the next 2 weeks, focusing on rideshare options. In rideshare, we mean carpooling and vanpooling. Next, please, Christine. So what I what I hope to do is give you a little bit of history of carpooling and vanpooling. For those that were at the summit, this is done independently of Tom Sierney's 3-hour presentation. It doesn't go back quite that far, but I wanted to give a kind of a feel for how carpooling and TDM in general, but carpooling has how that's evolved over time more recently, not going back too far. And then I'll share some in carpooler demographics. We took a deeper dive into some of the data that's available from the Census Bureaus to take a look at, so we can understand a little bit who's carpooling, and giving you some clues perhaps for marketing going forward. Next week we'll talk about two primary things. One is the vanpooling, give you a brief overview on vanpooling, and then also Christine has sent out a copy of the successful risk management for rideshare and carpool matching programs. We'll review that, but also looking to have you take a read through that. It was sent to you with a copy of the PowerPoint today, so as part of your homework. And then we'll talk a little bit about the effectiveness of these programs in terms of travel impacts. Next. All right, so here we go in a partial history, and I'll say this was done in development with Jesse Glazer, who's now with Federal Highway Administration. So he helped refresh some of my memories on some of these. Next. So Vonnegut says history is merely a list of surprises, and I think that's what we've seen over the time. And it can only prepare us to be surprised yet again, which is likely to happen as we go forward. Whether it's something hidden like COVID and their impacts, for example. So kind of going back into the World War II, which are some of the images on the bottom, it's actually when carpool as a noun first appears. And then in 1962, it became a verb. So we carpool became a sentence. Certainly workers were encouraged to carpool to help the World War II effort, in particular to help save rubber. It's hard to see, but that image on the far right with a man looking at the thermometer is actually not vehicle miles. It's called tire miles saved. So that's how they were reporting it. The middle black and white is kind of the early version of an employee transportation coordinator at a work site to provide help to people finding a carpool. And then there's a variety of the promotional materials. And you've probably seen many of those already.
Sorry.
Next, please. And then in the 70s, basically kind of was what you might refer to as the dawn of carpooling. There were certainly in the early 70s, we were dealing with the first gasoline shortage, where there were gasoline spikes in prices, but there were also long queues at gas stations. So it became an issue of availability, and people were looking at saving basically their time waiting in line for gas, not paying. Paying it was certainly much more expensive, relatively speaking, but I think it was the long queues that had more to do with it. I also saw the opening of busways, or eventually it became diamond lanes or high occupancy vehicle lanes, and maybe the earliest case of slugging too, which is also referred to casual carpooling in some markets, and that's where potential carpool partners meet at a park and ride lot that are headed to the same destination, and strangers just basically jump in the car to meet the occupancy requirement and drive, rather than a long-term commitment to carpooling. It varies by trip who you might be riding with or driving. It's also when we started in the mid 70s, started to see carpool matching programs get produced, with about 25 urban areas having it. And many of these, of course, were mainframe type computers with punch cards, not um, small computers. So it's a long time ago. Basically, the vision is, as I put it, was something like all we need is a regional computer matching system to make it work. Next. So in the mid to late 70s, it's what kind of the area of technical assistance where we saw the first TDM conference or carpooling conference was held in Houston in 75. Again, some Santa Monica Freeway was what we would call the first and last take a lane HOV lane, where they took an existing general purpose lane and converted it into HOV lane. As you can imagine, that was not very popular. I think it was the last instance for that happening. Federal Highway was very active in publishing guidebooks and holding events. In 76, the National Association of Vanpool Operators, NAVPO, was created. Eventually, that evolved into the Association for Commuter Transportation and merged with the Applied Ride Sharing um, AR, Applied Ride Sharing Professionals to form ACT as we know it today. Again, um, Federal Highway distributed the ride matching software called Commuter Information System. In the late 70s was the start of vanpooling with Vanpool services. The companies that are in the vanpooling business, I should say. Was formed under Chrysler, VPSI, as it became known, and now as Commute with Enterprise after going through uh, some evolution. And the first national ride-sharing conference was held in Baltimore. So you can see there's a lot of activity going on. Um, the late 70s, you saw the start of another gasoline shortage and a major price spike. Again, there's ARP, Association for Ride Sharing Professionals, merged with ACT to form ACT. It was primarily public sector members at that time. NAVPO was a lot of private sector companies that were operating vanpool programs. President Carter appointed a national task force on ride sharing to recommend laws, et cetera. So the highest levels of government were actively involved with supporting carpooling. There's again, a second wave of regional ride sharing programs out of those initial 25 that were getting involved with it. So there was approximately 50 urban areas that had programs. Most were located either within state DOTs or metropolitan planning organizations. And there were also a few private nonprofit organizations. We'll touch on those here shortly. Next. Um, the National Rideshare Task Force published Ride Sharing Meeting the Challenges of the 80s, recommending policies and programs and laws for federal and state governments to include. Another conference was held. National Ride Sharing Demonstration Program was created so we could test various programs and they could offer technical assistance as well as training. The second from the last bullet, the National Automobile or Dealers Association actually launched a campaign. If you want to say, they felt threatened by government policies encouraging ride sharing. And they were talking, as you can see, the image on the right is basically make sure you stay in the driver's seat. When they take away your right to drive, they take away a lot more. So you can see that they were very concerned that the carpooling was ready to take off. And again, Transportation Research Board and Federal Highway Administration published a well-known National Cooperative Highway Research Program report called Guidelines for Using Vanpools and Carpools as a Transportation System Management Technique. Again, distributing it to a lot of the DOTs. Next. Again, this was that was the era of higher tech, lower touch. And then in the 80s, we started to see more regulatory sticks, if you will, being offered. We had Share a Ride, which actually provided personalized assistance. They weren't, rather than using computers, they were basically using index cards to match people up in a very personal basis, and actually were very successful percentage-wise doing that. The program I started in 1980 in Richmond, Virginia, installed the first mini computer system that had, oh wow, like 40 megabytes of storage, as I recall. But the regulatory sticks started to come in. So Reg 15 in Southern California was a trip reduction program that required companies of 100 or more to submit a trip reduction plan. You saw trip reduction ordinances such as the one in Pleasanton, California being started to try to reduce traffic or shift. In the case of Pleasanton, they were focused on shifting trips outside the peak. Reg 15 gave way to Rule 1501, which was adopted to develop trip reduction plans. And it actually gave employers alternatives for meeting the standards for the carpool rule. So they could actually buy their way out of it, for example, by providing, I think it's something on the order of, I think at the time it was maybe like roughly $60 per employee not to have to abide by it. There were other ordinances, including one in Tucson and one in Phoenix. Similar concept, Reg 15. All those were kind of air quality driven, and basically would penalize employers for not submitting a plan. They did not have penalties for failure to reach the goals that were set for them out of those plans or ordinances. In 1990, the feds took the Clean Air Act amendment included the employee commute options program, which required employers in severe or extreme ozone non-attainment areas to increase their average passenger occupancy by 25%. It was made voluntary a couple years later and essentially went by the wayside. But you were talking about cities like Houston, Philadelphia, New York, of course, Chicago, Milwaukee, and I'm missing some. I think Atlanta too is another one. There were about 7 or 8, I think, in the severe category, and LA, I think, was the only in the extreme category. The ICE-T model legislation created a congestion mitigation air quality program that helped funds many of the carpool programs and continues to do so in many parts of the country. The state of Washington passed a commute trip reduction law. It took place in 91, and the Rule 1501 in LA issued a cost survey to try to get a handle on how much it was costing employers. Interesting that they did kind of a small sample of employers to try to work through some numbers in terms of what they were actually spending on the program. What they found was it roughly quote unquote, costing them $100 per employee per year. But when they followed up, they found out the employers that were filling out those forms were, let's say, making some errors. For example, the regulation only applied to the workforce that was in the 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. range. And so what happened was that they would offer a transit pass, and they would give it to all their employees, including those that are outside that arrival time period. So basically, it was double the amount. The $100 was about twice as much as what it should have been. So, but that was, again, you think about whether it's $100 a month or per year, or 50. If it's 50 per year, you're spending about $4 a month per employee, or maybe about, what's that, 20 cents a day, work day. So in the scheme of things, it's not a huge amount, but it certainly got everybody's attention. Next, please. Um, in '92, we started adding some more carrots back into the system. The Energy Policy Act in '92 allowed employers for the first time to offer Vanpool benefits tax-free, the qualified transportation fringe benefit. Employer, while Vanpool was included on that, parking and transit, and for a limited time later on was the introduction of bike subsidies. Carpool subsidies, for the most part, remain taxable income to this day. So an employer can't provide a tax-free carpool benefit. They can provide a carpool benefit, it just becomes taxable income to the employee, as if they were getting a raise, for example. You started to see in '95 the introduction of express lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, if you will. Um, and the South Coast Air Quality Management District repealed the 1501 rule and replaced it with Rule 2202, which is focused on larger employers, not 100 or more, but 250 or more. And not so much as carrots, but there was making carpools are making a hit into the public psyche, if you will, by issuing a movie called Carpool, which ended up getting a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 0. So carpooling wasn't looked upon very friendly at that time. Next. Uh, the Census Bureau started to collect mode split data annually instead of every 10 years back in around 2000. We saw the introduction of, again, more performance-based and pricing-based strategies, such as cash, was referred to initially as cash for commuters in Atlanta, where they gave a 90-day cash incentive to single occupancy vehicle users to try alternatives. And what they found was, over multiple years worth of following and tracking these individuals, the retention rate was significant in terms of, after the 90 days ran out, many continued to use an alternative mode once they got exposed with that. Washington State DOT introduced a very creative program called the Trip Reduction Performance Program, where it was piloted, where you could suggest a strategy, and what it was essentially would do it would guarantee half the money you requested. If you reached the target that you set that they agreed on, then you would receive the full amount that you bid on, essentially, up to a certain amount. And they would take the proposals that gave them the best financial deal. And then that became rather successful. The funding ran out a couple years later, but it was very interesting. USDOT tried to introduce the concept of urban partnership agreements in multiple states. And they had the 4 T's: tolling, transit, telecommuting, and technology. Interesting enough, they refer to TDM as telecommuting. Don't understand it, but that was what they said. Telecommuting, TDM fell was under telecommuting. The idea was they wanted cities to try use all these 4 T's in addressing congestion. And then, not to be outshined by the movie earlier, the television show Carpoolers debuted in October 2007, and then was canceled in March 2008. So again, that didn't last very long. Technology seems to have certainly been the wave of the future, including things like the introduction of 501 traveler information systems became more popular. You see all the social media and uh, offerings that became evolved in the early 2000s. You saw more online ride matching systems. There are more ride chat ride matching providers in the market today than there have ever been. We see some communities that allow hybrids to, or had allowed hybrids to have access to high occupancy vehicle lanes, where they issued stickers. So that become very to spur hybrid purchase because they get free access as a SOV to be able to use as HOV lanes. And then there were introduction of more TDM models, including EPA's commuter model and our TRIMS model here that estimated societal benefits of carpooling and TDM. Next. And then there we also saw over time generally some changing institutions. We saw certainly many many MPOs assuming the lead for providing commuter information, commuter connections in Washington, D.C., Dr. Cog in Denver, PIMA Association of Governments in Phoenix area. We saw the introduction of and growth of, for a while, of transportation management associations, also called transportation management organizations, and in some places, transportation and management initiatives. There are some of these that were started as kind of small TDM agencies that represent an activity center. In other communities, the TMAs were countywide commuter assistance programs, if you will. You saw some of them evolve over time and some of them disappear over time. We've also saw the development and then the sunsetting of several large nonprofit organizations, independent organizations, the Rideshare Company in Connecticut, Rides for Bay Area Commuters in the San Francisco Bay Area, Commuter, which is what the original program was called in Los Angeles, Southern California, and Caravan, which was a nonprofit started in the Boston region. All those programs are no longer around. We've also saw the introduction over these years of consultant managed programs. So one of the first was what was called initially Gold Coast Commuter Services. It's now called South Florida Commuter Services that serves everywhere from Key West all the way up to, I think it was Palm Beach now. So it includes Miami and Fort Lauderdale, et cetera. Rides for Bay Area Commuters actually turned into 511.org. And Caravan turned into a statewide program at the time that was called Mass Rides. The Transportation Research Board evolved from having a committee on ride sharing to a committee on TDM. Part of that reason was when papers were being submitted for consideration for public presentation and publication at Transportation Research Board, they had TDM in the title and they didn't have a TDM committee, so they created a task force. And that eventually evolved into a self-standing committee. I've already talked about NAVPO, and there was also, we saw more introduction of the private sector, including Uber, Lyft, and at the time there was another one called Sidecar, which is no longer around. Next, please. So if you like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past, as Thomas Jefferson said, what might the future look like? Next. That might be included what I call change and change. We'll see more price sensitivity change in terms of money. You're seeing the introduction of managed lanes with a pricing component. You're seeing pay as you drive insurance, where the rate for insurance is based on typically vehicle miles of travel, as well as the type of driving you do. Whether they're road user charges or VMT fees, we'll probably see at least more opportunities in that direction. And of course, we're seeing the growing environmental concern, including whether things like employee commute behavior is falls under Scope 3 emissions, whether those ultimately get tracked and reported by uh, employers going forward. Right now, it's not required, but you might see more companies embracing that and reporting their sustainability, ESG. It's also, I think we're going to see certainly more high touch. I would think you might even bridge it to the extent high tech with that. We would see AI perhaps providing more touch to the actual consumer to provide more custom solutions to them rather than giving them all the same sort of level of service. Another high tech is actually using more smartphones. We're doing um, and social media, all those types of high tech ways of reaching people. You might even see as car technology improves and we have maybe autonomous self-driving vehicles become more available, you might see some people clamor for the ability to ride as a rider rather than as a driver of a vehicle. And then actually, perhaps there are probably what we might consider new market opportunities, such as livability issues, housing, access to jobs, health, all those types of reasons. You might be looking at commuter assistance programs, expanding their services to embrace seniors and other groups that find it difficult to do driving or unable to do driving. And we may see car sharing fleets and transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft replace individual ownership in some niche markets. So that may be what's out there. So that's a kind of in a nutshell, a lot of the kind of the history and the types of things that we've seen over time and how things evolve. And there have been a peaking of interest in carpooling in the 70s and 80s, but whether it's air quality or whether it's congestion or energy, there's always been different driving forces that push the industry forward. So, but one of the things that does come up occasionally when you talk to people is why are we concerned with a commute trip if it's such a small percentage of all trips? Um, well, there's certainly changing population characteristics. We have certainly a continued growth in vehicle miles of travel. Our patterns are changing, whether it's due to COVID and or the ability to work from home for some people on a regular basis. The energy consumption, energy use is always still there with us, while the cars are getting more efficient, more effective, and electric vehicles may be uh, replacing some of the um, internal combustion engines or ICE vehicles. We might see some more of that. And certainly air pollution continues to be a concern as we go forward, with mobile sources being one of the leading causes, if not the leading cause of emissions. Next, please. So why do we care about the commute trip? Well, if you look at person trips, so if you took all the different trip purposes like shopping, etc., um, person trips to and from work only. This doesn't include a category which they call dropping off someone because it's hard to tell if it was for work or for other purposes. So we just left it out. That's 11% of all trips. But if you start zeroing in, okay, what are we concerned with? Are we concerned with it every day? For air quality, probably, but for congestion, maybe no. So then it becomes, if you just focus on the weekday, it's 13.9%. And if you look at the peak period, for example, the AM and the peak period combined, that counts to 16%. So we've gone basically about 50% higher than if we're just quoting person trips. But if you zeroed in just the AM peak period, the 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. slot that many of the trip reduction ordinances use, that's about 32% of all trips. So it's a significant portion. So that's why we focus on the commute trips. And the same with drivers. If you focus, that's all person trips. So now if we just focus on the driver side, it goes up from 32% to 38% in the AM peak. So can make a big difference. Next, please. Yeah, it's just said the same sort of thing. It accounts for about 38% of the vehicle driver trips being made, the commute trip. Now, what kind of motivators? This was an interesting, as part of their commute trip reduction requirement, the employers are required in the state of Washington are required to survey their employees, and they including possible driving motivators and non-driving motivators. And I figured I'd just share that with you to give you an idea of the types of issues from certainly the non-driving motivator. These are the people that are not driving, is what I'm, or saving money is one of the big issues. But if you look down the list, it's things like option to telework, um, environmental community benefits for doing it. They see health benefits for doing it. And then on the driving, what motivates them to drive? Convenience, too long for the options. It may not be safe for bike walk. Those are the type of reasons. So just to give you a general feel for some of the motivators and what people say. And the sample on this was, I want to say over 200,000 people that completed the survey. Next, please. Okay, next. All right, let's talk about carpool trends. Again, I try to look at the data a little bit deeper or from a different perspective than we most often or most typically do. What this map is doing is split everybody up into 5 categories, what the percentage of carpooling is. So say, for example, Florida, we're in the 8.7 to 9.7 range. You look on the Texas to the West Coast, they're in the 9.8 to 15% range. You look in the Northeast, you're looking at 3.8 to 7.7 carpool share. Not in many of these communities, it's to be expected, for example, that in the Northeast, you're dealing with high levels of transit service. So in areas where there's little transit service, um, such as Montana, you're more likely to have people find them as a bigger share of people using carpools because they don't have the same options. Next, please. All right, try to take a look at, say, the 15 largest metro areas, and I've ordered them in descending order from Riverside, San Bernardino of about 11% down to the Boston area of about 6%. So those are you can kind of see these metro areas. I've also highlighted Miami, Fort Lauderdale at 9.3. But again, the larger cities, the Washingtons, the Phillies, and New York obviously have a higher degree of transit than some of the other cities. But at the same point, you're still looking at Houston, Phoenix, LA, Long Beach, all in the 9 to 10% range of carpooling in 2022. So I think on some of these slides, you're going to see that perhaps the fall off in carpooling in some communities has not been as great as what transit has experienced proportionally, but and or is rebounding. Next, please. So for example, one thing that kind of might have maybe hard to focus on this, I tried something different. The red bars show a decline. So the cities with a decline from 21 to 2021 to 2022. The green bars show an increase. So for example, right there, kind of in the middle, Miami, Fort Lauderdale went from 8.9 to 9.3% from 2021 to 2022. Oh, from yeah. Sorry, I mislabeled the one on the bottom. I borrowed that from one of the other slides. That should be 2021 to 2022, not 2019. But you see there's a mix of greens up there as well as reds. So it looks like about half of them had a positive, an increase in carpooling, and half of them saw a drop. Kelly asked how, let's see. Yeah, Kelly asked, how does COVID show up in the data? Um, I've avoided the COVID year on this particular slide. but that would show up in a decline, and it probably will pop up if you look at one of the future slides. Certainly, work from home is bumped up to, I think, number 2 behind drive alone. Carpooling used to be 2, but work from home is number 2 most popular mode in many communities. And then QMAS is slugging data included in these numbers. Um, It's a good question. I think it would be because these are from the American Community Survey, and they're generally asked something along the lines, "What do you usually do?" So if they slug, if they carpool on a recurring basis, it's likely they would put carpool. So I would think there is. Now Kim, that really only applies for the most part to a few communities that do it. Um, the Washington D.C. area is the largest, but we saw a little bit in San Francisco, and we saw some in Houston. A little less so in Houston than San Francisco. In San Francisco, they referred to it as casual carpool. Next, please. Okay, here's basically the pre-COVID of 2018 to 2022. These are in alphabetical order, but you can get it again. The red ones showed a decline. You can even see some of them aren't a substantial decline, just a slight decline, and the rest, the, the grayish, yeah, grayish, dark greenish, whatever, um, are those that showed a slight increase or an increase of any type. So again, you got a mix where you have um, Detroit showing a decline, and you have Houston showing an increase, for example. And these are number of workers. So versus just percentages. Next, please. David says, would assume the cost of autos affects this longer run change. That could be true. Thank you, David. 15 largest metro areas. Again, this is showing from 2008 through to 2022, so you can get an idea. The 2019 drop in 2019. You can see looking across there that's see quite a few dips from 2018 to 2019. But now you start they didn't collect the information for ACS in 2020. So you see 2021 is the next jump, and then now you start seeing it rebound. Again, these are the next, please. And then for those in Florida, I thought I'd show you too the same sort of trends again from 2018 to 2022. Similar experience, if you will. Slight drop in 2019 in some of the communities. It tend to be the um, smaller communities show the most fluctuation, like the villages on the far right. Next, please. Uh, Again, Florida from the largest share in 2022, which was the Sebring area of 13.5, down to the Pensacola area, which was 7% in 2022. Was the red bars are 2022, showing all decline. So about half the Florida areas saw a decline. Florida metro areas saw a decline in carpooling from 2019. Okay, next, please. Now, who carpools? All right, let's go a little bit deeper. Next. So if you look at the work by age, if you look from the right side, the bright orange, and then the brownish color, and then the green, right, um, are basically 16 to 44. So you get a general idea that the younger they are, they're more likely to carpool than drive alone. Skews a little bit older, and transit is about the same as carpool, though maybe a little older. Next, please. If you look at it in terms of what you might suspect, the longer the commute, the perhaps the more likely they are to carpool. So that's always I decided to plot them over the 5-minute increments using public use micro sample data to see what happens at those 5-minute increments. And you can get an idea, it tends to follow that that regression line there fairly closely. As you get further out, there's more variation, and that has to do with fewer observations within those 5-minute increments. But you do get the general thrust of it. It does, you can see early on the lower left-hand side, it tends to follow that line pretty closely. Okay. If we look at um, the various generations, Gen Z, millennials, etc. Now, we've got, for example, um, under carpool, you're looking at Gen Z is the 12.3%, and the silent generation over 76 years old is 5.7. Again, so the younger the folks, the more likely they are to carpool. You see a little bit of a fall off and drive alone, or uh, once they get up to the over 76. Of course, there's also perhaps fewer people working in the over 76 category. Next, we've plotted the same sort of thing versus age. Um, and as you might expect too, there's a big fall off from when they first started being able to drive from the 16 to 18 range. And then it just slowly goes downhill from there. So as you might suspect, it's not the age, but the age is probably an indicator of perhaps increased income over time. The more you work, hopefully, the more you're compensated. But again, it kind of shows that general trend of age. So if you're focusing on people that are carpooling, you're maybe looking at the younger ages, the 30 and under, for example, or 40 and under. Next. How about the ability to speak English? And there's a variety of different ways of showing this. This was if they speak a language other than English at home, 33% of those folks were likely to carpool. If you look a little bit specifically, though they speak a language other than English, they still speak English very well for 17% of them. And they speak English less than very well for 16%. So, and transit has perhaps the more of the similar language barrier. Next, please. Um, this just takes the same information I showed earlier and compares it to within each generation, so you can kind of see the distribution within their own generation. Next. We start looking at occupations. Um, the actual carpool shares within an occupation vary from about 1%, a little bit under 1% to almost 10%. Where, like, for example, the carpool share by occupation, office and administrative support have the largest share, almost 10%. Uh, if you're looking within the carpool share within the occupation, farming, fishing, and forestry, again, is not a large number of people, but within that category, they're certainly probably more remote and probably more likely to uh, carpool as a result. But if you start skimming down those names on the right, you'll see a lot of um, groundskeepers, construction, food prep, production, a lot of typical blue collar workers. Next, please. 15 occupations with the most carpoolers in terms of number of carpoolers. Elementary and middle school teachers were number one, cashiers, laborers, etc. So again, this is the profile of which occupations had the most carpoolers. Next, please. Just out of curiosity, one of the categories they had was urban and regional planners. And I just took a look at there, it had almost 472 people that indicated that was their occupation. So I looked at their mode split just to see. Um, Carpooling was the fourth most used mode by urban and regional planners. But you could see work from home there is 22%, but drive alone is only 56%. And there are a variety of reasons for it. It could be that they're working late, doing public involvement, etc. Maybe the location where they're at about whether they can do the things they want to do, like bike, for example. But even bike and walk are significantly higher than what you typically find. Okay. I do get this suggested. Well, everybody who carpools, it's all just family pools. Um, I'd I'd say I'd correct it and call them household pools, because you could have two roommates that are not part of the same family, but in the same household. What I did is I looked at the public use microsample and did a comparison of um, the individual records and the records that showed um, more than one person from the same household that was carpooling. The assumption made was they were carpooling together. So it's quite possible they could be carpooling with others and not together, but it's a ballpark. So what we end up with, 54% of the folks drive with others from outside the household. So more than half have a mixed carpool, if you will. 36% drive with only one other person from the household. Might be a spousal carpool would be an example, or a partner carpool. And then 9.6% drive with at least two other people from the household. Um, so again, you get it 54% drive with others from the household. So people saying, oh, most of them are just um, family pools. They're mostly husband and wife, for example. That's only really 36%, or at least 36, maybe 45 if they're in the paired up in the third bullet. But 54% are driving with others throughout the household. Okay, next. Okay. Over half of the carpoolers have less than a 20-minute commute. This may surprise you if you look at um, the travel distribution of them. Um, Most people think carpooling is they have very long commutes, and quite a few that do have very long commutes. And this is long commutes in terms of time. They don't report mileage, but to have over 50% of the folks have 20 minutes or less carpools. These are some, as you can see, some are very short, under 5 miles, which are basically roughly 9% of the carpoolers have under a 5-minute commute as a carpool. Next. Okay. Now this is going to be your homework assignment. Go to the next one, please. Yeah. All right. Let me, I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So this is the American Community Survey page. I'm going to start it back. This is a short assignment. You'll go to on the slide. It will show you which ones where to go. So you get here, you go into Explore Census Data. Just type in commuting, and then I've asked you to use this one, this table S0802, means of transportation, and you'll see it'll pop up the response of in this case it's the country, but we want to have I want to have you look at this for your geography. Either use a your county. Let's use a county. So let's use the county I'm in, Hillsborough. And now you can see on the right-hand side, it pulled up Hillsborough County. It's pulled up the carpool, the drive alone, the carpool, and transit as you scroll to the right. So what I've asked you to do is, one is look at what the carpool share is. Oh, yeah, sorry. But I asked you, well, one of the things I've asked you to is look at the travel time to work, what the distribution is. What is the largest share for travel time in that particular community? So in this case, it would be 15 to 19 minutes, and report that out. Okay. If you want to look at it a different way, you can use commuting characteristics by sex, for example. Um, and that will show you carpool share. So in this case, let's 9.4% in Hillsborough. So that's all I'm asking you to do is look up the values for your community, send it to me as an email, and I'm going to stop share. I'm going to pull that up, please. Yeah. So look for the carpool percentage and MSA. The carpool percentage is in that 801. So they're both there. So you'll see 802 will give you the answer to the question here. And then the last item is you can either grab it from that URL, or if Christine will be sending it out, which is a document called Risk Management for Rideshare Carpool. It's a dated publication, there's no doubt about it, but a lot of the lessons learned and understanding if there are things you'll likely encounter about carpooling and liability questions that get raised that'll help you answer some of those questions. So we'll quickly go over some of that next week. Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll hang on a little bit, and Christine's uploaded the evaluation. So if you take a moment, please do that. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next Wednesday.
You left us stunned, Phil.
Your head's swirling. Is that right, David?
I think